Hi AP Econ students, Mr. Mully here, and in today's video we're going to be finishing up our look at elasticity. Finishing up looking at elasticity of demand and then talking a little bit about how that factors into supply. Hope you're excited, I'm excited, let's get started. Now again, I want to let you know, for me personally, elasticity was the most difficult thing for me to learn when I studied economics. And even when I was prepping for this class, again, it was the hardest thing to get my head around. So hopefully in the first video, I've smoothed over some of the issues that I encountered, and hopefully this can be a much easier process for you. So let's talk about total revenue, price elasticity of demand, and total revenue. So total revenue is the amount that a business, a firm, receives from the sale of goods and services. And how do you determine total revenue, the total amount that they receive? You take the price of the good and multiply it by the quantity of that good. So if I'm selling cookies and I'm charging 2 JD per cookie and I sell 2, multiply them, I've made 4. My total revenue is 4. Yay. Now the reason why you need to know that is economists can compare the total revenue of a good to determine how elastic it is. And if it's inelastic, if you're in a business, you got to charge more for that. If you're finding at that price it's inelastic, dude, charge more until it starts becoming elastic. You want to make as much total revenue as possible. So when you open up a business, that is something to consider. Let's look at how that can be calculated. So if you're given something like this on the AP test and you say, okay, so let's look at lattes. You go down to Starbucks, you go down to whatever coffee shop that you adhere to. By the way, fun fact, the town where my house is in Australia, we have no chains. Like, chains do not really exist in Australia, but there's like a ton of little local coffee shops. The town where my house is has like 20,000 people, and I swear there's 20 coffee shops. It's ridiculous. Anyway, so let's say the price of a skinny latte. You're going low fat. At zero prices, you would buy 5 lattes because, you know, bang for your buck. If that changed to $1, people would buy 4, $2, people bought 3, $3, people bought 2, $4, people bought 1. You are not doing well as a business here. You need more customers, but this is just simplified. So the total revenue, if we multiplied the price by the quantity, here's the total revenue. Now, if we want to determine the elasticity of that skinny latte as the price changes, we just put this into the normal formula that we talked about in the last video. You divide the percentage change in quantity divided by the percentage change in price. So all you have to do is figure that out. So how does that percentage change as total revenue changes from 0 to $1, $1 to 2, 2 to 3. And then when you divide those two, here's the numbers that you come up with. And again, we're using the midpoint method. That's why these numbers are negative. So based off of that, we can figure out how elastic something is. Now remember, if something is between 0 and -1, it's inelastic. If it's -1, it's unitary. And if it's over -1, it's going to start becoming elastic. The higher the number gets, the more elastic it gets. So that's just a little bit of a recap. Now, I'm going to show you 3 graphs here, and the reason why we're doing this is because you may need to interpret some of this information on the AP test. Now, I'm actually going to, I actually wrote this down because this seems a little bit complicated, so just bear with me as I look down and read my notes here, okay? In the elastic region of the demand curve, right here, and this is based off the chart we just looked at, lowering the price will increase total revenue. The gains from increased purchases, shown in the light green area here, are greater than the losses from a lower purchase price, shown in this little red area. The green area is part of the total revenue that exists at both prices. So you might need to rewatch that again to get that all in your head. Let's look at a second chart. This is when you have unitary demand. When demand is unitary, lowering the price will no longer increase your total revenue. We could see that from the chart we just looked at. The gains from increased purchases, shown in the light green area, are equal to the losses from a lower purchase price, shown in the red area. So you would not want to change your price if you have something unitary. This is when demand is inelastic. Here's the region. When in the inelastic region of the demand curve, lowering the price will decrease total revenue. The gains from increased purchases, shown in the light green area, are smaller than the losses from a lower purchase shown in the red area. So again, you may need to rewatch that and get that on your head and figure it out, because you will be asked to interpret some of this graphical data. And so you need to know what to look for here. It's easy to just look at those numbers and figure out if it's inelastic or elastic, but understanding that on a chart is a little bit more complicated. So rewatch this section. Now, a couple of notes on income elasticity. So how a change in income affects spending. We looked at price elasticity of demand, where the change in price alters how people will change their buying patterns. But what happens when income changes? How will that affect elasticity of that particular good and service? Now, all you do to calculate that is you divide the change in the quantity demanded, but instead of dividing it by the change in price, you now divide it by the change in income. That's the only thing that changes. Now, the numbers you're going to get are going to be a little bit different depending on the good. So something to know is that an inferior good, something like ramen noodles, something that is pretty cheap and you buy if you don't have a lot of money, they'll have elasticity below 0. A necessity normal good, so normal things that people buy like fruit, typically will have elasticities between 0 and 1. They'll be somewhat inelastic. And luxury normal goods will have an elasticity over 1. Okay, so now your brain's starting to hurt because you're like, okay, I had the idea of what's inelastic and what's elastic with numbers when I figure that out. Right, now how does this, oh my gosh, now I'm getting different numbers here, my brain's exploding. Just calm down. The reason why we have these particular notes here is when you're considering the type of good we're looking at. So the numbers are going to be different depending on the type of good that you're analyzing. So on the AP test or in class, if I say, hey, we're looking at a luxury normal good here, the number you're going to get needs to be interpreted a little bit differently than if you're just looking at a nondescript item like we had in the last video. So just note that. Don't freak out. But that's a little hurdle you got to get over. Let's also talk about cross-price elasticity of demand. So cross-price elasticity of demand measures the responsiveness of the quantity demanded of one good to the change in price of a related good. So if the price of peanut butter goes up, how does that affect the price of jelly? If the price of falafel goes up, how will that affect the price of pita bread? And we need to understand this because if you're a firm that has complements, or if you're a firm that has substitutes, you're Pepsi and you're competing with Coke, you need to understand how to react when prices of that other good change. And so the way that you determine that is you divide the percentage change in the quantity demanded of good 1 to the percentage change in the price of good 2. So your price, the quantity demand of your good divided by the price change in that other good. So how can you determine how elasticity will be affected? So if it's a substitute, difference between Coke and Pepsi. When the price of one good rises, the price of Coke rises, the demand for Pepsi will increase. That shows that it's inelastic. Because you can change your buying habits, that particular good, soda, is inelastic. Because if the price of Coke goes up, I can just change to Pepsi or Mr. Pibb or whatever I want to drink. I don't even really drink soda. I don't know why I'm using that example. It's because a lot of people drink soda. Don't judge me. Now, if we're looking at a complementary good, let's say we're looking at falafel and pita bread. When the price of, let's say, falafel goes up, the demand for both falafel and pita bread will decrease, so people will want less. Well, let's say you're in the you're in the pita making business, and you're like, hey, we're not changing anything, we're not changing our prices, but falafel's prices went up, so that impacts you as well. So if you're owning a business where there's some complements to what you're selling, you have to be aware of that. And if we're, again, looking at the cross-price elasticity of demand, the formula is below. It's the same process. Let's move that cursor so you can see. It's the same process. You're just comparing the first good to the second good. Last thing we're going to look at is the price elasticity of supply. So how does the responsiveness of the quantity supplied change to a change in price? And that's the price elasticity of supply. So when a change in price happens, how much does that affect the quantity that I will supply as a business? So for instance, oceanfront land is very inelastic. The reason why, there's only a certain amount of it, and so people can't just make up more land. It's perfectly inelastic. Whereas cell phone towers are relatively inelastic because you can technically make some more, you can technically supply some more if you are in the business of making cell towers, but the land can be fairly restrictive. Whereas if you're talking about shawarma, if you're a shawarma shop, man, you can really pump out supply if the price goes up because you want to get more product out there. So that's relatively elastic. So it's going to be greater than 1. Something to note if you're in a business is to remain flexible and keep supply elastic. Some firms actually store the goods because if demand goes up, you want to immediately be able to respond. You don't want to say, hey, the price of this is going up and people are buying more. Oh shoot, I need to supply. The price goes up. I need to supply more, but I have to wait 6 weeks to get more product out. So some businesses will hoard their product so that they can put more out when the market demands it. Time also makes things more elastic. So in the immediate term, if I want to put out more of a supply, in the immediate term, I can't necessarily do that. But as time goes on, as I ramp up production, as I make different deals, it becomes more and more elastic over time. One more thing to talk about, how do we determine the price elasticity of supply? It's the percentage change in the quantity supplied divided by the change in price. So that's all we've got for elasticity. Note these formulas. We're going to give you a lot of different scenarios to determine this. You just need to practice it. But this video really gives you the foundational understanding to figure out if something's elastic or not. Well, that's all we have for today. Hope you learned something you didn't know before. Thanks for watching.